Thank you. Yes, and we're trying to record these as well. Which, by the way, we had a glitch with our recording last month, which was a bit of a bummer. So we were not able to record the presentation from Oklo. However, we typically do record it and share it on our YouTube page afterwards. So future speakers, we have a couple of great excellent speakers lined up for September. It's going to be Christina Joyce. She's actually a U.S. partner representing Steady Energy, which is a Finnish nuclear startup company that I came across when I was in Finland a few months ago. Their focus is on thermal-only reactors to support district heating systems, small reactors, about 50 megawatts. And so, so this is sort of a really interesting technology that could have applications in Alaska. And so we'll be hearing from Christina in September, so next month. And then October, Mariana Lau, who is a student with the Alaska Center for Energy and Power. She's a UAF student studying energy resource engineering. And she interned at Idaho National Lab this summer, working with Hayden Bryan and Jason Hansen. And the goal there was really to look at sort of the logistical challenges or issues associated with deployment of nuclear technologies in a rail belt grid in particular, in Alaska generally, but most specifically to the rail belt. And so she has done a bunch of work looking at some of the challenges associated with that, and put together a white paper working with Hayden and Jason. And so she's going to be sharing that. She's continuing research on this when she's back at UAF this fall. And then in November, we're hoping to have the Canadian Nuclear Association speak. They're tentative at this point in time, but the goal would be for them to share an update on what's happening in Canada related to SMRs and MNRs, small modular reactors and micronuclear reactors. Canada is pretty arguably ahead of the US, at least when it comes to SMR deployment, with the Darlington project that Ontario Power Generation is leading. They've broken ground on their first BWRX 300 reactor. And so actual construction is going on. That's the first in North America on that reactor. Okay. So switching over to some updates, there is the Alaska Defense Forum is happening in Fairbanks this week. And so the Air Force is up here. One of the things that we're going to be doing is hosting a town hall tomorrow. So is that, yeah, tomorrow night. Okay. Tomorrow, Wednesday from 6 to 7:30 at the 8-Star Event Center. And so anybody that is local in Fairbanks might be interested in that. I think we're going to drop the town hall notification here. I'm not sure if there's an opportunity to dial in remotely. Do you guys know that Nicole or Claire, do you guys know if there is? It feels like the last time they did this, there was a opportunity for remote participation. Do you know? No? Okay. All right. Well, anyhow, you've got the information for that. Just want to make sure I am still on here. Yes. Okay. You guys can all hear me, right? Claire, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, good. All right. So, so another event is there is a press release coming out later on today. There's been a letter related to another potential microreactor project in the interior. It's called Project Janus. And that is a Army reactor program led by a gentleman named Jeff Waxman. He's up there in Fairbanks now. And he so there's been an effort by local elected officials and other leaders in the interior area led by Mayor Grier Hopkins from the Fairbanks North Star Borough to have a letter with a number of signatories from leaders in the interior looking for opportunities to partner with the Project Janus program, not just around a micro reactor at a place like Fort Wainwright, but really using that as a stepping stone toward some sort of development that could impact or tie into the rail belt grid as a whole. So that's a press release that's coming out, I think, later on today. I actually don't have that with me. I was hoping to maybe share it, but anyway, that's kind of an interesting bit of news that we might share around with this group after the fact, or look for it in the Alaska news outlets. There's a couple of other updates. What we're going to have is Nicole is sort of dropping some of these into the notes. So I'm not going to go through all the like kind of broader new things that have come across our desk in terms of news related to nuclear, but there's a couple of like state roundup documents and things like that. Some updates related to a new Alaska initiative. So those are going to be in the notes. So with that, I would like to open up. Is there anybody else that has any updates they'd like to share with the group? Just go ahead and raise your virtual hand and chime in. You'll get one more chance at the roundtable at the end as well. All right. Going once, going twice. All right, we'll go ahead and move on. So our presenter here today is Alexander Hoppus. Am I saying that right, Alexander? Did I?
Well, it's Hoppus. Yeah.
Hoppus. Okay, sorry about that. So I really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today. I've been really interested in this topic. I know this has been something that the working group has specifically requested. We're very interested in the concept of the nuclear fuel chain, of the potential for reprocessing fuel. And so, that your company is one that has been a real global leader in this area. I will just quickly read what I have here as your bio, that you've been at Orano for more than 16 years, supporting federal and state government affairs, public policy, and external engagement. And Orano is, of course, a global supplier of nuclear fuel cycle technologies and services using fuel management and transportation and storage systems. I'm sure we'll hear a lot more from you during your presentation. So thank you for taking the time. Can I just ask, where are you physically today? Where are you located?
I am physically in Washington, D.C.
Okay. So only 4-hour time change. That's not so bad.
Yeah, no, it's fine. And Claire had to keep me straight in terms of where that actual time change landed on my real calendar. So
Right.
thank you to her for getting
Fair
me here
enough.
where I needed to be at the time I needed to be here.
Excellent. So I'm going to turn it over
And
to
thank
you.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you
And
for the intro. I can launch in if you're ready,
you
and
go right ahead.
maybe just by way of intro, supplement a little bit on my bio and how I kind of arrived at where I am, because that may help explain my perspectives here as we get into the presentation and the deck itself. I joined Orano when it was then Arriva in 2009, and have been with the company over several kind of corporate iterations since that 2009 arrival. Ultimately, the Arriva split into two operating entities, one to focus on reactor construction and maintenance and technologies at the reactor site. That entity is called Framatome. The other entity that split out of the Arriva operation was Orano, and Orano has expertise and operations across the fuel cycle. So, whereas Framatome operates within kind of the boundary and areas of the reactor zone itself, Orano serves to provide the materials, the material management on the back end, and the services related to storage and logistics everywhere in between. And so, if you, I don't know if my slide deck is up, but I can give you just from my background. Let me scooch forward here. So I talked a little bit about where Orano sits in the fuel cycle, and it gives me an opportunity to talk to you guys from a little bit of a different perspective than you're maybe used to hearing in these forums, because we are not a reactor development company. We're not a vendor trying to sell or frame the latest technology or design qualities of the reactor we're hoping to get deployed. But we're a bones and guts operation that provides everything that reactor is going to need to operate, and everything that the community around that reactor is going to need to feel confident and safe that the materials on site are being accounted for, have a path, and are being managed, beyond the level of appropriate safety standards established by the regulatory authorities. So for the nuclear fuel cycle, for those that are not familiar, I know most of the crowd is relatively technical, but what this means for us in terms of what exactly Orano does, we mine uranium, fresh uranium. We do that through joint ventures in Canada and Kazakhstan and other locations throughout the world. So we're a global mining operator with redundant geographic sources of supply. We sell that mined uranium to utility customers in the United States and throughout the world. The U.S., North America, and Europe are our two biggest markets. But with that mined uranium, there need to be several value-adding steps in the fuel cycle in order to make it useful for fuel and reactors. And Orano does those value-add steps as well after the mining. That's the conversion of the material and the enrichment of the uranium into a form that can be then pressed into fuel and used in nuclear reactors. So we call that whole segment of activities the front end of the fuel cycle. It's basically everything that we do from a service and additive perspective to make the material ready for the fuel fabricators to put it into reactors. After it's used in the reactor and the fuel is spent or used, depending on the regulatory classification you want to use, Orano builds and manages the storage and transport systems to store and maintain that material, which is excessively hot and highly radioactive. So it's maintained beyond multiple barriers of confinement. And in the U.S., that material essentially sits on site in interim storage, dry fuel storage containers, waiting for a repository solution to present itself for the material to move along that path. In Europe, and I think probably what's more interesting to this crowd here, and in France specifically, that material is taken from the reactor sites at regular cooling intervals after it's been in the fueled the reactor machines, and transports that used fuel to Orano's reprocessing recycling facilities in the north of France, where the fuel is then broken down, dissolved, reprocessed, and the energy value is extracted from it and routed for creation of new recycled fuel that performs isotopically identically to the regular fuel used in light water reactors. And it takes the waste product from this dissolved fuel and forms it into a specifically engineered waste form that is designed for long-term storage and vitrified glass form for ultimate disposal in a geologic repository. So the recycling service that is completed and offered in France essentially takes customer used fuel and returns to that customer an engineered waste form for ultimate disposal, and it returns the energy value from that used fuel in the form of a new recycled fuel that can then go into their reactors again. The French fleet, that's how all of the used fuel is managed for the French fleet. Our facility in France has treated material from 6 or 7 different countries in Europe and Japan. And so it's not just an exercise in terms of the technology and the actual reprocessing of the physical material. It's all of the logistics and support systems that get that material from the production site to our recycling and management facility, and then back to either a reactor site for burning the recycled fuel, or to disposal site for the ultimate waste. It's probably appropriate for me at this point to note that that there is ultimate waste, despite the energy value being optimized out of the recycling process that we undertake in France. There's still a volume of waste that has to be dealt with in a geologic repository situation. And I think the difference between the French system and kind of the indeterminate system in the United States is that, you know, the French system is, the waste is designed on a path to optimize its to engineer it for disposal, rather than just maintaining it in the fabricated fuel form that sits in the dry fuel storage in the U.S. I'll move on because I know that folks will have additional questions on this as well. But our position on being close to the fuel on both the front end and the back end also puts us in a position where we do a lot of decommissioning work for the sites that are no longer operating. And so we've dismantled the Vermont Yankee and Crystal River sites in the U.S. and have an active kind of ongoing decommissioning effort that tackles nuclear projects cleanup in Europe, but also actively works in parallel with operating facilities that are producing today. For example, there's active decommissioning in parallel to the active construction that's happening at our La Hague recycling facility, just because that is a decades-old living facility, and as portions of it are obsolete and taken offline, the decommissioning team comes in behind to do that cleanup. Because the U.S. policy is focused on once through and disposal, our business on the back end in the U.S. is almost entirely around the production of and fabrication of dry fuel storage containers, where the spent fuel is then stored after use in the reactor, awaiting a policy decision. And so, you know, for the U.S., as we look at the environment and how it's changing, you know, I can give you an example of our technical and design approach and how it's responded to the changing policy environment. In the U.S., we're focused now on the design and production of a new transport and storage container that brings attributes focused on retrievability of the material and transportability, and that's really a response to what we see as a shift in the policy and operating environment emerging in the U.S. toward a view of used fuel at these sites as a resource rather than a waste. And so having the ability to retrieve material, to transport it in the same system that it stays stored in, we think provides the kind of flexibility to the system that's going to be demanded of some of these new technological efforts on the back end. If you want to move on to the next slide, this is really my kind of wheelhouse and where I'm most comfortable talking about elements in our portfolio, and that's the policy side. And it just so happens that in the used fuel space, you know, it's primarily the policy constraints that are binding us. Less so the technical and regulatory constraints, although those, you know, exist at a certain level as well. It's really the fact that our federal policy primarily, but everything that flows from that has essentially been frozen since 1987. And despite a number of you know, legislative efforts and regulatory efforts to to authorize, different options and capabilities. Where we sit in terms of laws on the books is a system that was designed and ratified in 1987 and has been basically managed through, a shuttle process back and forth between operators and the federal court system to determine who pays for for the ongoing operations needed for used fuel. And so that I think that that basic policy dynamic has really frustrated progress in the United States, but it's something that that I think is shifting, and it's worth noting for your group and others like it, because the shift in outlook toward used fuel as a resource is going to drive the kind of decisions that developers are going to make on reactor types, technology, fuel, and everything that comes along with it. So, in the federal space, we went for a period of time where the fleet in the United States was essentially level or declining in terms of number of reactors. That same number of reactors, produce a consistent, 20% of the U.S. electricity, despite not adding new machines. They just upgraded capacity, but the machines in the United States, are developed based on the use of light water reactor fuel that is available and produced by Orano at their enrichment facilities in Europe. The new reactor developers and their approach to management of the fuel is going to have to be integrated into their initial cost structures and operating approaches throughout their system. So on the policy front, there's a couple of pressures here that are really driving it, right? You've got the geopolitical impacts across the world, and that's driving pressures on supply chains, particularly in the Western allied world. And the reality there is that we have a deficit in terms of what we can provide in terms of fuel without using Russian or Chinese material. And so the policy system and the commercial operators over the last 4 or 5 years have been aggressively organizing to create new capacity, new domestic sources of fuel supply. Orano, as a result of that effort, I can tell you, has expanded our facility in France to serve U.S. customers, and we're moving down the line toward a $5 billion investment in a new enrichment facility in the state of Tennessee, which would produce the equivalent of what comes into the market today from Russia into the U.S. So that facility is designed specifically to reduce the U.S. market reliance on that Russian or Chinese fuel, and those pressures are driving considerations related to security and fuel and risk that we see every day with our customers. The other pieces of this that tie in are the move toward recycling and the executive orders that were issued in the first part of last year that jogged the system into a comprehensive effort at modernizing and simplifying the NRC's regulatory processes and requirements. And so all of those reviews and streamlining activities and commercial organization in the market and policy conditions being set by Congress, all of these are relatively recent, 5-year phenomenon, and they're driving the behaviors and what we see across our market and where we engage today. If you want to go on to the next slide, the federal momentum, it's real, right? I mean, I think the bipartisan durability of support for nuclear has been demonstrated across the past few administrations, but there's a lot to do between now and 10th of a kind in terms of the infrastructure needed, the supply chain needed in the United States, and frankly, making sure that the policy structures that define all that align. And so we have a number of acts and modernization efforts that have already been achieved out of the Congress and the states as well. But really, the deployment of these machines, of this infrastructure, is going to happen, at the state level and in concert with the kind of consent dynamics and engagement that focuses on the issues that you guys are focused on. And so the federal government can set the conditions, can do what they can to reduce the risk, but operationally we have to have a workforce that's ready, a supply chain that is reliable, redundant, and can deliver, and all of that really starts to take place at partnership level at the state and community and the state and community levels. I think I skipped a slide related to our facility in Le Hague, the recycling facility in France, which I wanted to speak to just kind of as a general story to lead into the discussion that we'll have. In France, the Le Hague facility has been recycling fuel for about 4 decades, and it was the result of a specific set of policy decisions and a commitment that was durable across the political system in France. There are some differences in how the commercial and economic ecosystem for electricity exists in the U.S. versus in Europe, and in particular France. In France, the electricity is provided by a single primary utility, Electricité de France, and EDF is owned by the French state indirectly, as is Orano. And so when we're talking about policy commitments that are made over decade-long horizons, the French system can do that with a little bit more simplicity, having a limited universe of key economic stakeholders in the room. The math has to pencil for both EDF and for Orano in order for recycling as a service to be something that is viable and maintained by as a solution by the French state. And so the process in France is really to assure that viability, to assure that the technical approach is sound, that it's providing the kind of long-term systemic value that the policy set out to produce at the onset. And that policy is renewed on a relatively consistent basis. And so, the mechanism for extending or building out that facility, for example, we just witnessed taking place over the last couple of years. There was a period when the Le Hague facility, given the global dynamics in nuclear, was facing a real quandary about the potential future throughputs that would be available and how the economics would work out decades into the future, with the German fleet shutting down, with the Belgian fleet not adding machines. Those were our primary foreign customers, in addition to Japan, and so that that demand for recycling services was in serious question. And with a facility the size and scale of La Hague, and with the operational and maintenance intensity that it maintains in order to operate safely, that becomes a real cost and economic question. That theoretically could have shifted the policy outlook of the French state. Now, it just so happens that the market and the need for nuclear services, in particular reprocessing services, has shifted as the need for nuclear and the recognized build out requirements have grown. But when the
It must be Alexander's connection. We have you back with us? Okay, we lost you.
Sorry, I was just getting to the key reveal,
Yeah.
which is the French state decided that, hey, what we had done initially still holds. It's a good idea. But there's consequences to affirmation of that decision, right? We have a facility that's 4 decades old that needs a massive renewal, right? And that facility now has a policy and national political mandate to operate through 2100. And so everything that follows from that leads into the design of what that facility, we are calling it the back end of the future. So it's a full reimagining of what capabilities can be drawn forward from our existing platform. Whether there are capabilities, for example, currently fuel is fabricated at a facility, at a different facility from the facility where it's separated. For the back end of the future, those facilities will be co-located, right? Because it makes more economic, more operational sense to do it that way. Currently, the fuel recycled from the French fleet is recycled once, and we have a number of used MOX fuel assemblies, which is the recycled fuel, sitting in pools that we intend to then recycle again under a multiple recycling process in the new and updated facility. And obviously, with the interest in reprocessing in the U.S., the various technologies that are being developed in the U.S. labs and elsewhere in the world, it's a really exciting time to be deciding how to integrate design and operational throughput flows on a facility like this, when the playing field for commercial machines and technologies is really, the range is pretty wide. You could have high enriched low assay fuels. You can have plutonium based fuels. You can have the regular more familiar light water reactor fuels. And so all of those fuel forms have various consequences downstream that should be that must be accounted for up front. And I think if I could leave one message with this group, is that these reactor decisions are not just reactor decisions. A community is not committing to reactor; they're committing to the material in their community for 40 plus years. They're committing to the operators design and accountable systems for maintaining that fuel and certifying its safety. I mean, it's all of these things that are kind of less obvious or less headline grabbing in the nuclear development space are the things that are going to really drive project success or failure at the community level.
Awesome.
I kind of skipped all around here, and I apologize. I know you guys are in this probably deeper deeper than I gave credit for, and so I think it's probably best for me to shut up and take questions or answer things that I haven't gotten to that you might have spotted in the slides. Again, I apologize. Um, um, Jumped around a little bit, but happy to engage questions or um, concerns or topics that you guys saw or would like to cover.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just start by opening it up to the group. I have, of course, always lots of questions, but I'm really curious to see if anyone else does. So raise your hand if you do and introduce yourself. And I'm just going to be quiet for a minute and see if anyone does that.
You
getting
guys, let me. I can throw something out there that I know I missed that you
go
guys may
ahead. Go
hear
ahead.
about. The Department of Energy has been for a long time, trying to figure out how do we deal with this with the Nuclear Waste Policy Act that's sitting there frozen, and we
Yes.
don't have a repository, and we're not going to get Yucca Mountain up and ready. And so, we've had these iterations, right? The interim storage efforts, some government backed, some private backed, all requiring some sort of legislative initiative in order to enable. I would note for this group that the legislative momentum that exists right now, and particularly kind of in the next 3-month window, is emerging as unique in my tenure watching this subject. I don't know if it's enough to actually secure something that can pass the Congress and jog loose the system. The Congress is a separately difficult animal just in and of itself today, but we have real language that's been submitted or kicked around the system by the administration. There's active work in the Senate Energy Committee to look at things that we might do. The Department of Energy is, I'm sure you guys are aware, actively soliciting these life cycle
Yeah.
innovation campuses,
Yep.
which is, I had cynically kind of written off as an extension of the consent-based siting,
Hmm.
rope a dope that
Hmm.
that we were involved in for a couple of years. But I think you can't discount what that process on the life cycle campuses has turned loose in terms of actual interest signed by governors of actual
Hmm.
states, related to commitments to accept waste as part of a larger economic development initiative. I think that the fact that they are in a position at the Department of Energy to actually go through a winnowing down and narrowing down process to select a couple sites from a larger universe of interested sites. Obviously was the intention of the department all along, but as a watcher of this, I was skeptical that would be an ultimate result, and certainly these agreements would need to be negotiated at the individual state level, and some of what states will require is going to require legislation to enable too. But in terms of actual traction and movement in the legislative space, which is where all of these policy items in the recycling world really need to go to get untangled, it's worth watching over the next 6 months.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that's going to have all of that cascade effect on how the waste is categorized, how it's whether it's risk based or source based or process based. Right now, all waste incidental to reprocessing is categorized as high level waste, whether it's carries that same risk distinction or not. And so having the ability to align some of these standards around more practical realities, and having the legislative authorities to set up structures for dealing with this is necessary, and there's momentum like there hasn't been.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think there was like 26 states or something that responded to that
Yeah,
RFI on the
I
like,
was trying to come up with
yeah,
the actual number, but I mean, there a serious subset of
yes,
five,
yes, yes.
um,
Well,
and all are going to have different points of emphasis and things of that nature. But I think it does speak a little bit to this, this notion of resource versus waste on the material, and shifting the larger ship of state on that question then allows us to get into some of the details of, well, and how do you capture that resource? What are,
mhm.
how do you do it economically? How do you do it in concert with the communities that are going to be hosting these facilities? But absent a determination that we're bound and determined to make use of this material, the incentive isn't going to organize around it.
I'll just make two quick observations reflecting on that. Number one, Alaska was one of the states that responded. There is, almost no chance that there'll ever be a long-term nuclear waste repository in Alaska, but a lot of the motivation there was really in trying to make sure that we're identifying our interest in nuclear more broadly, right? And so making sure that we're sort of describing
Yeah.
where we do think we can participate. And so so Alaska was one of the states. And I'll also kind of comment, and I've presented to this group before on the Onkalo long-term repository in Finland. And it's pretty interesting there with the community that's like adjacent to that. There's a very, very high proportion of support for that repository and for nuclear energy in general.
Yeah.
Within that community that's essentially hosting that site, so it's just interesting. It's kind of an observation more than anything else. I thought it was pretty interesting. So yeah.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting how they've taken that most difficult piece and have worked it pretty successfully, and it's all oriented around around the priority given to the engagement on it. I mean,
Yes.
um,
So Ness Perry, I see that you turned your camera on, and I know you were quite involved with that process with the life cycle innovation campuses. Do you have anything to say about that? Do you want to add anything? And you're on mute. Okay, there you go.
No, just wanted to thank Alexander, I think Alex for short, but for your comments. That's super helpful. I work on behalf of DOE NE8, the team that is leading that charge of the nuclear life cycle innovation campuses. And I'm just gathering comments as they come up. So that's why I'm always listening in on these calls, but also as a
of
resource.
course, yeah.
Any questions about wanting to know more. I know that a lot of my role, the main purpose of my role, is just to do stakeholder engagement, so I'm here as a point person, can answer some questions as much as like I'm able to. As of right now, there's so much that's still under wraps, but I can give some updates that there are 5 sites and that DOE is actively dwindling down. I have a tentative timeline. I don't think it's realistic, honestly, if you're asking me personally. Sometimes things just go slow roll. You know how it is working with the government. But I have an ideal timeline of, at some point this early fall.
Okay. Well, great. Okay. Well, we
Thank
do
you,
have
Ness.
some.
I hope I accurately captured the characterization.
You did, and
It's a
it
good.
is.
I mean, it's a good story. I again, like I did not expect it to be as successful as it was, at least in the initial stages. So, and I think I think having watched this issue, that's what's needed to break it open is a real firm state level commitment and some
Yeah,
competition, frankly, across those states.
absolutely. And we are seeing that, different states are kind of giving us their asks. They're starting to give out asks. They're starting to give out what they want in exchange. And I like that you framed it as like shifting the narrative of waste to a resource
Mm-hmm.
base. Like, let's look at this from a larger perspective. Is we have a larger issue to solve, but communities can definitely benefit from that. That's how I like to think of it as well as an organizer myself.
Well,
yeah, I mean, we've got things are coming to my head that I meant to mention that I didn't,
it's okay.
like
That's
the
okay.
like the sampling regime, for example, at our La Hague facility. Hundreds and thousands of ground, water, air samples, and the interesting piece about that is that the regime itself, this what is sampled at what frequency, under what laboratory processes and conditions, were all worked out up front ahead of time with Greenpeace. So Greenpeace, has long been a active, involved intervener, especially in European nuclear matters, and so being able to define kind of the set of what is important in terms of the information and environmental samples at the front end of that process allowed us to have a kind of single understanding across stakeholder groups that everybody could be accountable to. And so when we take all of those sampling measures and they show what they show, there's no ambiguity about the impact of the plant on the environment and the life and towns around it, because all of that has adhered to the agreement as we've laid it out. And I think that just as a practical engagement approach is really simple but very successful in terms of how it's aligned folks around what's really important.
Yeah, reprocessing is a huge part of what DOE is taking into account, headed into like the final stages. Obviously, they're looking at the entire life cycle, but specifically the back end is what they're weighing the most on, and that's not a secret. That's genuine knowledge that we can all agree on, that we should be concerned about that back end as much as I do care about generation for the future, and so do many other stakeholders. It's important that we figure out that back end piece, and I think reprocessing is in our cards. Maybe not right this second, but definitely in the future.
Yeah, and these are long lead things, right? Both from a community acceptance standpoint and policy and commercial and financing, and all of that stuff is not an overnight thing. And there are many tentacles to untangle in order to get to a bankable project like this. But you have to start, and we're starting, I think.
I'll ask this one question really quick. From Sherry, where are you in the project timeline for the planned $5 billion centrifuge enrichment facility in Oak Ridge, Tennessee?
Got it. So we've submitted our application to the NRC. Expect turnaround and decision on that by the mid part of next year. Which would take the NRC fully off of the project's critical path. We're out currently securing offtake commitments from our customers so that we can finance the project. That's active as we speak. We're targeting kind of the balance, the second half of next year for a final investment decision on the $5 billion scaled plant, but we have a commitment to the Department of Energy under the task orders that they awarded pursuant to the Nuclear Fuel Security Act program, where we will owe the Department of Energy a metric ton of enriched material from our domestic facility in 2031. And so work backwards from that 2031 mark with the requisite scale around that, driven by the speed at which we can secure the offtake contracts. And once the installation is licensed and operating, that's the modules and additional capacity extensions are relatively simple and responsive to demand. It's not we will not have a 5-year window between, module X and module X plus one. It's the window is really on the upfront Americanization of the design and the construction of the site itself. The NRC has been very responsive. DOE is obviously very interested in getting the capacity up as soon as possible, and have put their money where their interests are on that in terms of accelerating that. And so, the state of Tennessee has been very receptive, and we have the underlying land has been transferred from the Department of Energy to the city of Oak Ridge, who will then transfer it to us. And so all of these kind of component pieces are moving in the right direction, ahead of our own internal decision on the scale of the investment initially at the end of next year. But we're committed and developing and have that 2031 capacity target kind of as our operating goal. I should add that, when Russian tanks rolled into the Ukraine, within months we had a decision from our global board to expand capacity at our French platform, which was the lowest cost way to bring new Western capacity online to meet any deficits if there were to be exclusion of Russian material from the market. So, when the Congress said no more Russian material, after 2028 in the U.S., we're not going to be able to service that deficit from our U.S. plant by 2028, but we will have additional extended capacity online about that time from our French facility, and so as we add incremental capacity and roll forward with a second facility here in the U.S., that's how the gap will ultimately be filled and stabilized.
Do you think we're making adequate progress toward that goal? Do you think we'll be able to achieve that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the Russian material is about 30% of our enriched imports.
Is it still today?
It's declined. I mean, I think if you look year over year since the ban, you had a bump kind of as folks who had contracts and wanted to bring the material in and make sure it was in. I thought you would see a share kind of rise, but I think it's steadily fallen in the years since then. The Department of Energy did not go into this blind and surveyed utility operators in terms of what they have requirements for and where their inventories sit. And so it's going to be tight in terms of supply. And in fact, some of the conversion side pieces of this may be even tighter than the enrichment side in terms of making sure that, we have all the capacity that we need absent Russia. But yeah, I think that's kind of the scenario as it sits.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you just share, because I've had this question come up a couple times in the last few days, like where our uranium is coming from? Like who are the big global suppliers other than Russia?
So Kazakhstan is a huge supplier, and Canada. And we get most of our uranium from Canada for the U.S. market, just because that's the way it, geographically it makes it easier in terms of shipments and all and that. But it is, the mined uranium is more of a fungible, flexible product itself. It's got futures and it's got spot market, and the enriched material and the conversion services don't lend themselves to that kind of additional financialization, and so it's a little bit harder to hedge against those gaps. I mean, they have to be physical, and some of those enrichments are at specs specific to an operating plant, and so having inventories just on hand doesn't necessarily make the most economic sense. And so
And I was asking this question when I dropped off line earlier, so I don't know what you heard or not. But from Dan McIntosh from Golden Valley Electric Association, he was asking about the cost trajectory and like whether, and you may have already answered this because, like I said, I dropped off line, but that fresh fuel is cheaper than reprocessed fuel. Did you answer that question?
I didn't, but it is. I mean, there's a number of ways you can slice the economics. That's a rational way to do it. But it also, that doesn't account for some of the social value of generational equity associated with that. It's, when we did a study through the Boston Consulting Group back in the 08, 09 period when the U.S. fleet was poised to grow, and there was additional consideration of whether or not recycling would make sense. And at that point, I think uranium was like $100 a pound, and I think the numbers penciled out to essentially a wash, depending on how you structured the factors in the economic calculation. But if you're selling recycled fuel by itself, it's not going to compete on a cost perspective with fresh uranium. But if you're selling it as a component of service that also affords you the ability to have engineered waste form returned and stability of fuel supply going forward, maybe it's a service that balances across your economic requirements.
Yeah. I mean, I don't see any other questions. If anyone else has more questions, we've still got some time, so please drop them in. But I'm going to ask you just kind of a question I've been wondering about a little bit is like sort of this very different history, and you touched on this a little bit, but the different, really divergent history between like France and their approach to managing waste and the U.S. and like sort of really the underlying factors that sort of went into that. I'd love to just kind of hear your perspective on that.
I think the biggest one is this was like a de Gaulle era, post World War II, energy sovereignty as kind of a key animating factor of those decisions. And you look at the geology of France, and they don't have gas reserves, they don't have coal reserves. Their colonial properties were gone. Right. And so that's the environment that, the political system was trying to make these decisions in. And nuclear as a technology and as a rule generally spoke to a lot of those political and national security elements. And I think that in a lot of ways animated the decision on nuclear, number one. And then, the French are very good at systemically looking at, a problem or a solution needed and engineering to it. And so, they absolutely went into their commitment to nuclear, understanding that there was this whole fuel cycle skeleton that needed to be built to support all of that. Did so deliberately as part of a kind of systems construction from the start. So when you go and visit our operations in France, it's, wow, this makes a lot of sense, right? They don't have on-site storage, but for, the quantities needed for the period of time they need to cool. And then, the transportation casks take the material up to Le Hague. It all flows and fits together in an integrated way that, appears seamless when you're there. But for those who have lived the U.S. system that is so disjointed across those various material handoffs, it's eye-opening.
Right. So another question, and I'm kind of curious, about the question about domestic uranium mining. And, there's been a discussion of maybe reopening a mine in Utah, or this, I think, Velvet Wood uranium and vanadium mine. Like, what are your thoughts on domestic mining? Because I think we import like almost all of it at this point, right?
Yeah, and we've got I think you have to kind of roll the question back. I mean, is the purpose to feed all of our requirements through domestic sources, and is that possible or desirable?
Right.
And on the mining side, I'm not sure that answer squares with an all U.S. type of solution, particularly given some of the resources in Canada and neighboring and all of that. But there's also elements of uranium accessibility that are not mined, right? I mean, there's research initiatives in terms of seawater recovery of uranium because our oceans have a ton of latent uranium in it. Reprocessing is a potential stream. We have various kind of enriched tails sitting in the DOE inventory that could be re-enriched. So when you talk about the uranium market generally, it includes all of these various cats and dogs as well. And so I think it's, there's a need for domestic uranium or U.S. sourced material, if for no other reason than our defense complex requires it. They require unobligated material that has been mined in the U.S. that has not touched foreign technologies, all of that kind of stuff. But that's not the kind of scale that we're talking about in the commercial market either, right? So I guess I'm kind of dancing around your question, but to say, to the extent that the demand for materials is going to rise, the U.S. has geologic, resources that can be mined. It also has a pretty ugly history on mining operations in the U.S. And so anything that takes advantage of those resources needs to learn from the lessons and experiences of the prior efforts, because I think a lot of the resistance that those efforts would face stems exactly from the lack of communication and complications from prior mining efforts, and, particularly on native lands.
Yeah, we have some resources up here in Alaska, and there's some like very reasonable resistance to the idea of like actually moving forward with any. Yeah. So,
and what have you done with the resources that you have to optimize, the value that they can offer? And that's where kind of the recycling story from a generational equity and resource optimization standpoint is, I think, an attractive one, because you're not out there mining fresh uranium when you have recyclable material in your inventory that you're just not bothering to recycle.
Yeah, and I'll also mention like in northern Saskatchewan, where there's a lot of mining also going on, there's actually a lot of support for the mining there among Indigenous people up there. So there's different histories for sure in different places. So
for sure, and the way that the miners go about extracting is entirely different today than it was in the 40s and 50s, and so but it is something that can't be ignored and merits a deep understanding of when we're getting into these kind of things.
So Sherry has like one additional question here. So that, again, that cost comparison between, raw materials and then reprocessing, like, is there like a point at which that cost comparison changes if there's a reduction in fresh uranium materials that are supplied into the US market, or there's like a higher cost because we're not getting stuff from Russia anymore? Like, how does that change the equation potentially?
X can cross Y. I mean, if you have, a cost profile that is significantly higher for fresh uranium. It's going to incentivize the recycling of existing sources. I think the challenge that we would face in that kind of substitution scenario is scale, right? I mean, like, I'm not sure that you can rely on the kind of scalability of recycled solutions, at least near term, to be available to substitute at the scale of a huge price shock in the uranium space.
Right. Well, I don't know if there's any other questions. I mean, I thank you, first of all, Alexander. We really appreciate you taking the time to chat with this group. Any other questions? Or I can also just open it up for a general roundtable for any comments and feedback. Just kind of open up.
And I put my email and cell phone in the chat.
Thank you for doing that.
So shoot me, and I'm not great at email, but I'm pretty good on the cell phone. So if you need to find me, I'm happy to talk through this and tell you where I don't know and tell you where I might have some useful information.
Fantastic. So yeah, anyone, any final comments or questions? I'm just gonna open up the whole floor here before we wrap up for today. All right, doesn't seem like it. All right, we've got some thank yous. Claire, do we have any final wrap-up notes or notifications that we need to share? I'm just looking back at that. No?
I don't think so.
Are we good?
Oh, I glitched for a second. No, I don't think so.
Okay, awesome. So we're going to come back next month, and any of you that are interested in steady energy and thermal reactors for district heating systems, we would love to have you join us. Same place, same time next month. But thank you, Alexander. We appreciate it. Have a good rest of your afternoon and evening. Yes, and thanks for everyone for joining us. All right. Bye.
Likewise. Thanks, everyone.